The symbol at the heart of the Christian faith is not actually a crib reminding us of Jesus' birth. It's not a light reminding us of his life, and it's not actually a book reminding us of his teaching. Now, at the heart of the Christian faith, the symbol that stands dead center is a cross that reminds us of Jesus' death. From the very beginning, the cross wasn't some kind of embarrassing postscript that you and I should ignore. Now, it's the very heart of the Christian message. The Christian message stands around the death of Jesus, central to our faith. And it's why it's important for us to reflect on the cross and what's accomplished there. And no doubt, as we think about the cross today, there are many things that could come to mind and many things that would be worthy of us pondering. But I want to just look at three things that unfold at the cross from this passage. The first thing I want you to notice as we look at the cross today is I want you to notice that God is angry. I want you to notice that God is angry. Look at verse 33. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land. A darkness during the day, according to the scriptures, is always a picture of God's anger. In the Bible, light symbolizes his presence and his favor, but darkness symbolizes his anger and his judgment. Just think about it for a moment. At the time when the sun should have been at its brightest, remember this is the Jewish timekeeping, 6th hour is the middle of the day, what we would call noon. And so at the moment when the sun should have been at its brightest, darkness fell over the land. I know the skeptics immediately want to go and say, oh, well, it was some kind of an eclipse. Well, just so you know, the Passover always happens every year at full moon. A solar eclipse is scientifically impossible at a full moon. Now, darkness comes across the land because God is angry. My guess is, as I say that, most of us don't feel comfortable. We don't like to think of God as angry. And the reason we don't like that is because we think of anger very much in human terms. We think of anger in the way we get angry, unpredictable, wild, often associated with a quick temper. And so we don't like the thought of God being angry. But of course, God's anger is very different. God's anger is his controlled, personal hostility to all that is wicked and all that is evil. God is angry. And can I say to you, God must be angry. He must be. Remember, God is holy. Remember, God is just. How can a holy and just God pretend that nothing has happened in this world? No, he can't. And so he is rightly angry at sin. See, sin matters to God. Think about it. Lying matters to God. Selfishness matters to God. Deceit matters to God. Adultery matters to God. Greed matters to God. Violence matters to God. Sin, in whatever shape, in whatever form, sin matters to God. Now just let that wash over you for a moment, because I'm hoping as it washes over you, you'll get to a place where you will say something like, good, I'm glad. You see, I don't think it's helpful to live in a world where sin and evil don't matter, where we can just pretend they are ordinary and acceptable. And certainly as a Christian, I don't want to worship a God for whom evil doesn't matter, for whom sin doesn't matter, who will just turn a blind eye to that. He will sweep it under the carpet. Now, I actually want a God who will be angry at sin. And so as we come to the cross this Good Friday, we come understanding that God is angry. But with whom? With whom? As Mark chapter 15 unfolds, who is God angry with? And the answer, I think, is actually staggering. Because the answer is that God is angry with Jesus. He's angry with Jesus. The second thing I want us to notice, not just that God was angry, will you notice that Jesus was abandoned? He is abandoned. Look at verse 34. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me? Why have you rejected me? Why have you turned from me? See, no doubt Jesus suffers physical agony on the cross. I can't imagine the physical pain it must have been. But when he cries out in verse 34, that is not a physical cry, that is a spiritual cry. He's pleading with his Father. He's wrestling with his Father. Why have you rejected me? See, deep in his soul, he experienced what it is to be away from all the good things of God. He's abandoned. And yet just think about it. He'd never sinned a day in his life. He had never done anything wrong. He'd never rebelled. He didn't deserve any punishment whatsoever. So why? Why is he abandoned? Because Jesus has taken upon himself your sin and my sin. He's taken sin upon his life. I want you to imagine for a moment, I don't know if some of you used to watch British TV, but they used to have this program, This Is Your Life. Everybody over the age of 60 knows exactly what I'm talking about. I want you to imagine for a moment that this is your life. This is a DVD. Luke Giles, This Is Your Life. Boys and girls, DVDs are what moms and dads used to watch TV and films on before Netflix and all of those kinds of things. So I want you to imagine that this is my life. Here is a DVD of my life. It's a record of every word, every deed captured on DVD. I'm hoping that as you watch it, you will say, well, Luke, there's much to be applauded. But of course, we actually know, don't we? There's much to be ashamed of. Much to be ashamed of. I read a story recently of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Some of you might recognize the name. He was the creator of Sherlock Holmes. He sent a telegram to the 12 most respectable people in London as a joke one night. The telegram read this: flee, all is revealed. Within 24 hours, 6 of them had left the country. Interesting, isn't it? All is revealed, Luke Giles. On here, there may be things that might make me want to flee. Maybe if you had to look at your DVD, there would be things on there that would make you want to flee. I'm guessing not least the way you and I have treated God. Because despite what our lips say, and despite even what we do sometimes, too often we live as functional atheists. We say God is there, but we so often act as if he isn't. We ignore him, we treat him as if he's not important, and too often we insist on doing things our own way. Frank Sinatra, I'm really showing the over 60s today, aren't I? Over 60 Frank Sinatra, I did it my way. Well, of course, the Bible calls that treatment of God sin, and God is angry at sin. And so my DVD, Luke Giles, This Is Your Life, my DVD shows that I am more wicked than I ever realized. All my guilt, all my shame, all my sin is on here. Just think about that for a moment. Let's suppose for a moment that my left hand is me, represents my life. Imagine for a moment the ceiling represents God. Well, I don't know if you remember, but when we looked at Colossians chapter 2, it reminded us that there is a record of debt that stands against us. See, when you look at my record, you will see that it actually cuts me off from God. Because of it, I should face punishment. Because of it, I should face abandonment. Because of it, I should be forsaken. But here's the incredible grace of God. Instead of being angry with me, he's angry at Jesus. Instead of abandoning me, he forsakes his own son on the cross. You see, on the cross, imagine as it were Jesus, who was without sin, who was perfect in every way. I remember the ceiling represents God, and if my right hand represents Jesus, then at the cross there is no barrier between Jesus and the Father until he takes all my sin upon himself. You see, at that moment he takes my sin and your sin and the sin of the world. He carries the sin of the world upon his shoulders, and it's that sin that is the barrier between him and the Father. He takes the punishment that I deserved at the cross. He takes God's anger on himself. Friends, don't let that pass you by this Good Friday. Sin costs, and it cost Jesus. He is punished for my sin. He is abandoned in my place. He who was without sin became sin for me. So that when you look at me, there's no longer a barrier between me and God. See, it's not just that God is angry, and it's not just that Jesus is abandoned. That happens so that thirdly, you and I can be accepted. So that we can be accepted. Come back with me to Mark 15, verse 37. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." This is quite a strange 3 verses in terms of geography. And it's strange for a couple of reasons. You see, verse 37 and verse 39 both take place at the foot of the cross. Both happen on the Mount of Golgotha. But verse 38 takes place in the temple, which is on the other side of the city of Jerusalem. And in the temple stands a 9-meter high curtain that in the moment Jesus breathes his last is ripped in two parts, cut down the middle. Now that carpet was thick. Truth is, it was more like a carpet than a curtain. In fact, I've been calling it a carpet, haven't I? Very beautiful. It was made from one piece of material, and suddenly it is ripped into two. See, that curtain was a very significant thing in the temple. That curtain was a barrier. It was a barrier that marked the Holy of Holies. It separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place. It separated where God dwelt, or the symbol of God's dwelling, from where the people stood. It was a physical barrier between God and his people to remind them of their sin. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies through the curtain, and he could only do that once a year. No one else, no other time. See, the curtain was this constant reminder, stay out. Constant reminder, you have no access. Constant reminder that sinners are unacceptable to a holy God. It was really a giant no entry sign. Don't come in here. And as Jesus dies on the cross, that curtain is ripped in two. In that moment, access has been granted. In that moment, those who were once unacceptable can be made acceptable. The barrier is down. There is nothing preventing us from entering again. The consequence of sin has been removed. Because Jesus took God's anger, because Jesus was abandoned, you and I, if we trust him, can be accepted by God. We can come in and have relationship with God once again. You see, it's at the cross that we find acceptance. It's at the cross that we find life through Jesus. That's why in the midst of death, in the midst of heartache, in the midst of pain, we call this day Good Friday. Good Friday. Because we who were once excluded are now included. What's interesting, if you have a look at Mark chapter 15, is Mark chapter 15, though, focuses quite significantly not on Jesus. If you look at the text carefully, you'll notice that actually a large portion of Mark chapter 15 is telling us what everybody else is doing. It's the reaction of those who are watching these events unfold. It's as if Mark is saying, this is how the others are responding, but what about you? What about you? As you stand afresh at the foot of the cross, as you feel again the weight of God's anger, Jesus' abandonment, as you experience afresh the hope of our acceptance, how will you respond to that? How will you react to that? Just think of some of the people at the foot of the cross. There's the busy soldiers who just before this passage mocked Jesus and beat him. They're in the process of dividing up his clothes. They're casting lots to see who would get what. Just think about that. For these soldiers, the legacy of the cross is a new outfit. It's a new outfit. They're so absorbed in their job, they've missed the most important death in all of history. I wonder if there are people like that today who go through life, even doing their duty, fulfilling their responsibilities, and yet they miss the significance of the most important death that's ever happened. They're too busy, too distracted to ponder the cross for all it really is. Of course, we've also got the religious folk, the self-satisfied religious. I'm guessing these are the guys who in that moment ran straight away for their sewing machines. And what did they do? What did these religious Jews did? Well, they sewed up the curtain and put it back in place. They re-erected the barrier between man and God. They ignore the cross in favor of their own religious practice. Have you noticed how many people in our world today have created their own man-made religion? They have their own formulas of religious observance, of moral observance, and quite frankly, they are just too proud to receive the work of Jesus on the cross. There's a group of bystanders. They've come to watch. Remember, these are the days before Netflix. These are the days before television. These are the days before the newspaper. So apparently you got your entertainment by going to watch people die. Isn't that interesting? Actually, it could be today, couldn't it? They aren't moved to awe. They aren't moved to reverence. And the truth is, they aren't even moved to pity. There's a group of people who just want to be entertained. We want to be entertained. They're completely blind and completely detached to what's happening. How many of our modern world just wants to be entertained? Entertain us, they want. Oblivious to the reality of the cross. Oblivious to God's anger, to Jesus' abandonment, and to our acceptance. But let me ask you this morning, as you come to church, as you've gone about the busy week, as you pause today to take a moment to reflect, where are you at the cross? Where are you? How will you respond as you stand in the shadow of the cross today? Will you be busy like the soldiers? Will you be self-satisfied like the religious? Or will you be detached like the bystanders? See, it's important today for you to respond. Of course, if you were listening carefully, you'll work out there is another response in this passage that I haven't looked at yet. In fact, it's not just another response. I would suggest to you it is the climax of Mark's gospel. It is the high point of Mark's gospel. Have you worked out who it is yet? It's the centurion. It's the centurion who watches Jesus breathe his last. Remember, he is a soldier. Life and death is his business. He has doubtless fought in many campaigns, and no doubt he has seen many die. But by his own estimation, he has never seen a man die like this. In all likelihood, he is part of the execution squad. And as he sees Jesus breathe his last, he finally understands. He finally understands. Go back to verse 39. When he heard Jesus' cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." surely this man was the Son of God. Can I ask you today, whether as you sit at the foot of the cross, do you see that today? Do you see that afresh? That the one who died for your sins is the eternal Son. The one who clothed himself in flesh. The one who walked in perfect obedience. The one who humbled himself. Who took God's anger. Who was abandoned. Is God's Son. Who did that so that you can be accepted. See, the question this morning on Good Friday is, do you see? Do you see that surely this is the Son of God? And when you see, will you follow him? Will you follow him as God's Son? Or will you recognize him to be the King? And so will you come with hearts overflowing with gratitude? Will you come with hearts filled with worship? Will you come with hearts eager to walk in obedience? See, as we stand afresh at the foot of the cross today, how will you respond this Good Friday? Let's pray.